sinking of the Titanic in 1912 was the most traumatic and famous event in maritime history. Even today, if you walk down the street and ask someone to name a ship, odds are they will respond Titanic. Titanic was such a shock that in 1914, the largest international conference in history convened, the International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea. Their output became known as SOLAS and is the foundation of maritime safety regulation as we know it. In 1979, we had our own Titanic, the Fastnet race, where the loss of 18 lives shocked our sport. Our response included major revisions to organizing ocean races, measuring stability, and providing formalized safety at sea training. Just like the loss of Titanic was immediately tied to a failure of leadership, so are most of the losses in the Fastnet and many of the fatal incidents since 1979. Yet yachting safety at sea focus has been primarily on the use of equipment and evolutions such as man overboard recovery. Hands-on safety at sea training, initiated by Storm Trysail Club and Kings Point Merchant Marine Academy, now offered by CCA, New York Yacht Club, and many leading clubs, barely touch on leadership. Only in introductory remarks at our seminars do we briefly explore leadership, even though it's the key factor that ensures safe offshore sailing. Without leadership, the unsafe situation is more likely to occur and even more likely to have a bad outcome. Kind of like Lord of the Rings, we believe leadership is the ring that controls all the other rings. The father of the U.S. Nuclear Navy, Admiral Hyman Rickover, tied leadership to accepting responsibility. Quote, "Responsibility is a unique concept. It can only reside and adhere in a single individual. You may share it with others, but your portion is not diminished. You may delegate it, but it is still with you. You may disclaim it, but you cannot divest yourself of it. Unless you can point the finger at the person who's responsible when something goes wrong, then you never had anyone really responsible." Our goal today is to leverage your experience and opinions in plotting a course toward the development of leadership skills in offshore sailing. We start with no conclusions, other than we deeply believe leadership is the core competence required to achieve our goal of safe and rewarding offshore sailing. This implies that we believe that leadership can be learned and improved, that good leaders can be developed into excellent leaders. We hope it also means that poor or uninformed sailors who have leadership responsibility, whether they know it or not, can be made into better leaders. Big events cannot happen without generous partners, and we are blessed to have the financial support of our presenting partner, Safe Harbor Marinas, our supporting partners, CCA's Benelco Foundation, the Kings Point Foundation, Gifted of Larchmont, Gautier Insurance, and the Storm Trysail Foundation. From our preliminary preparation sessions, I expect the non-sailing panelists may surprise you. Dress their recommendations in sea boots and foul weather gear, and you realize how universal good leadership characteristics and practices are. Thank you for being a part of this endeavor. And now I'm honored to introduce Sir Robin Knox-Johnston. When did you first realize in your life that you had leadership potential? And was it something that came in any way from your family, or was it your merchant marine or naval training? How did you come across leadership as something that you had the opportunity to exert and also were interested in?
I think, Rich, on the cadetship, really. I mean, at school to a certain extent, although I was a bit of a loner. You know, my best sports were boxing, swimming, and long running, and they're not exactly team sports. But on the cadetship, you know, I eventually became a petty officer, so I'm in charge of a watch. A certain amount of that's ambition. You know, I was damned if someone else was going to beat me to the post, and I've always been very, very competitive. But once you're in charge like that, I think you learn an awful lot about how to get the best out of people. And that really, I think, is the secret of leadership.
What were some of the experiences that helped you step up your leadership skills to improve them?
Well, it's very hard, Rich, for me as a solo sailor to talk about leadership because I'm actually just leading myself. But I've also sailed with full crews a lot of the time. And I think you very quickly learn that the best way of leading a team is to make sure they know what's going on, keep them fully informed, and be very clear about what you expect from them. And they are meant to do to keep the boat going. When you first raised this, Rich, I thought about this and I thought, well, I sail on other people's boats from time to time. And how many times I sailed on a boat and said, I'm not comfortable. This skipper worries me. He doesn't really know what he's doing. And that led me on to thinking about what is it about leadership on a boat, on a sailing yacht? It's what we all do. And I thought, well, the first thing is ability, confidence, knowledge. The way you can tell your crew when something goes wrong, you instantly, from your own experience, and that's so important, this is what we're going to do. And the guys follow you because they say, we trust this skipper. And I think it all comes down to that at the end of the day. You want a skipper who knows what he's doing, who's got the right qualities, which means he's experienced, he's looking out for his crew, looking after them. And when he says something, they do it willingly. And that is really, I think, the best possible way of being a leader.
You also brought up a question when we were talking a few weeks ago, is how you choose a skipper to sail with, and what happens when you find out they're not as competent as you hoped? What can you do about that situation?
Do you know, that's probably the worst nightmare we all have to face, isn't it? You're at sea, you've agreed to sail with this skipper, and he doesn't actually know what he's doing, and he's worrying you. You can talk to him, but will he listen? And if he doesn't listen, you start getting seriously worried. At the end of the day, I suppose if things become fairly extreme, you're just going to say, get out of the cockpit. I'm taking over. Because you don't know what you're doing, and it'll kill all of us. And I'm not ready to die yet. And I've never had to do it, and I never want to do it.
Let's switch gears to the Clipper race, which is so unique in that you're taking relatively inexperienced sailors, mixing them with a few who are experienced, and sending them around the world. And could you discuss a little bit, Rob, about the average experience of the crew, how they're selected and trained, and then in particular, how you pick the captains and the watch captains in terms of personality, training, and then if something goes wrong, what do you do? This is quite the crucible of leadership, taking that kind of group and putting them offshore together.
Well, Rich, let's start with our selection of the skippers. We start off by making sailors mates on training voyages. And by this time, we've probably got 700 people we're putting through training, and each has got to do 4 weeks. And the first week is where we decide if they're suitable, and probably some of them decide they don't want to do it, and that's fine. We put the skippers on as mates, and everyone who does the training has to write a report on it. And also the skipper writes a report. Now, we get quite a lot of feedback from that. We then think if they're doing well with the crews at training them, okay, let's put them as skipper on the training. And again, we're still getting reports in. We're still trying to read them. Is this guy dealing with the crews properly? Is he sympathetic to them if they don't know what they're doing? Does he help them? Does he shout at them, in which case he's out? We want people who are leading people on. We want to encourage people to go sailing. And if they pass that, we then put them on our own course, which is 2 months, of teaching them all about how we expect them to treat their crews, how to deal with the media, how to deal with their accounts, and all these things that matter when you're running a boat. I cannot be there to make them clip on when they're in the Southern Ocean and it's blowing hard. It's got to be drilled into them. You clip on the first thing you do. And we have to train them to that point. You and I have talked about our man overboard drills. We practice that the whole time. We've lost 5 people overside. We've always recovered them. Sadly, 2 are drowned. Whitbread's lost 7 and only recovered 3. I think my training's better. And that's my amateurs, bless them, who've learned through our training to learn how to recover someone who's in the water. And we still insist on this because I've got the responsibility for all these people. I've got their lives in my hands. And once they've sailed, they're out of my control. I have to have them trained up to a safe point before I let them go sailing.
And do all the skippers have racing backgrounds before they get involved in your program?
Well, they have to have the Royal Yachting Association Yachtmaster Ocean with commercial endorsements. The most important thing is looking at what they've done with their lives. You know, if someone comes along and says, I've got this certificate and I want to skipper a boat, I say, yeah, but what have you done? Well, I've got the certificate. No. How many boats have you sailed across the Atlantic in? What else have you done? I'm looking for experience, because for me, experience is what counts.
And is it during these training sessions that you're able to discern the leadership skills or lack of skills? And if so, can further training or education help these skippers, or are they stepping up to too big a task in the time you have to actually improve their capability as leaders?
Very good question, Rich. We think by the time we put them on our skipper's course, we selected a pretty good team. I'm afraid to say that, frankly, we make mistakes, and we find the person doesn't just measure up, and we have to change them. We work on the principle that if this guy's got the experience and he's appeared okay in training, we'll go with him. But if we find he doesn't measure up, he's got to go. There's no choice. That's not what our crews are paying us for. They're paid to get a good experience and race. And if the skipper is wrong, then they've got to go. So
if you were asked the question, are leaders born or developed or a combination? Given your experience of the Clipper race, how would you answer that?
It's my view that leadership can be developed. I don't care what your background is. In 1914-18 war, the British Army largely took its officers from private schools, because on the whole they were better educated and they'd been in a cadet force. We've learned since then. We didn't utilize an awful lot of very good people who hadn't had that experience, and we've got much better at it now. And I do believe you can bring on skippers from leaders from any background if they've got what is required within them. And what is required within them, because I can anticipate your next question. It's got to be ambition. It's got to be willingness to learn. It's got to be that indefinable thing, really, that comes across. There's some people have an instinct for authority.
It's always great talking to you. And when travel begins, let us know when you're coming back over this direction. Okay.
The title of our panel is Leadership Beyond Sailing. Our objective is to look at leadership in a variety of different non-sailing scenarios to see what the common elements of leadership might be that we can then apply to the sailing environment.
I guess the first time I had really consciously begun to think of leadership in a formal capacity was when I joined the Marine Corps shortly after high school. It was 2003. The wars in Iraq had just gotten going, and I think there's probably not a better example of the hodgepodge of people that you end up with on day one as a Marine recruit showing up to Paris Island. You show up wandering around the airport. You're all wearing civilian clothes. Everyone's just out of high school or shortly after, and you've got people from inner cities, from farms, California to Kansas, and before you know it, you're whisked off to the Yellow Footprints. They've shaved your head, stripped you of all your personal belongings, and before you know it, you're all just a bunch of confused recruits standing in clothes that are too big for you, and lining up to take on the next 3 months of recruit training. And in very short order, they start to shake out who's a leader and who's not, and they try to develop everyone as a leader. And from day one, they begin hammering into everyone what the Marine Corps has whittled down to 14 traits of leadership. And I think it's a fairly good place to start. We all start learning about leadership long before we've consciously considered what elements make up an important leader. I know in my own experience, I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by a number of great leaders that maybe you recognize, maybe you don't recognize as leaders at the time, but as the concept of leadership starts to take shape in your own mind, you realize probably in equal parts what good leaders you've had as examples to emulate in your life, as well as the leaders that I think you can learn just as much from, who fall short of what you would choose to emulate in a leader. And I think something I realized in the Marine Corps and with offshore sailing is loyalty to those below you is just as important as those above you. You know, anger, as Eric said, is a really powerful emotion. And I think he also used the word that you have to be really careful with it, which I think is true. But if you can channel it appropriately, it can allow people to dig deeper than they can under what you would consider to be normal operating circumstances. I know we always use the word deep in the grind. In the Marines, that might be on mile 12 of a ruck run when you don't know when it's going to end. If they haven't told you if you're going to do 3 laps or 7 laps. In offshore sailing, it might be day 30 of a crossing. Specifically, you know, what comes to mind for me was the battle for Fallujah, when we were pushing through, and we didn't know how long that battle was going to take. But you know, as it got deeper into the 30-day range, where people haven't showered, people haven't slept, you haven't taken your boots off in 17 days. You know, you start to see a whole range of emotions that people have probably not tapped into before. But if you can channel that anger in a constructive way, you can really tap into a super powerful resource. And I think it comes back to camaraderie as well. If that anger, whether it be an individual emotion or whether it be a common purpose, for us in Iraq, it was fighting the enemy, and in offshore, it can be grinding it out through your 3rd, 4th day of heavy seas and 40-knot breeze. But I think, like Eric said, if you can channel that and use it constructively, it can allow people to access parts of them that they may not have known were there.
My name is Susan Blank. I am a board-certified pediatrician and an epidemiologist. After a 30-year commission with the United States Public Health Service and the Centers for Disease Control, I retired in August. I was pretty heavily involved in the early months of the city's COVID response, and thus my background slide, which hopefully you can see, which is showing you the New York City COVID trend data of cases and deaths as just some eye candy for the audience. I was asked to discuss, are there elements of leadership so fundamental that a land-loving leader in public health and STI can offer something useful to skippers as they face their days and face crises, besides just offering condoms? And my take-home message is yes. Leadership encompasses a set of behaviors which can be honed with or without a crisis at hand. Also, while these are behaviors that I've found critical in public health practice, I believe that they have applicability beyond, and I suspect in sailing as well. And when I looked up leadership, the most common definition that I found was the art of motivating a group of people to act toward achieving a common goal, which is really a complicated way of echoing Sir Robin's definition, getting the most out of people. We didn't really use the word, but the importance of redundancies. That shows up in terms of inventories. Yes, pilots have co-pilots that have the same equipment. Plan succession is really great in organized sort of well-drilled circumstances. But I also think, what Sir Robin said earlier is about this idea of like constantly developing leaders. And I think that as certain topics come up, there might be certain people like within your team who have a particular aptitude or show a particular sparkle for a particular set or kind of issues. And those are great opportunities to start bringing people in, and I would tell staff all the time, if I disappear tomorrow, you need to know about like sort of whether it's like where the skeletons are buried or like how to pull out this protocol off a shelf and like enact it or whatever. So I think they all sort of fall into that idea of like planning for redundancies and assuring that you have a plan to effect those redundancies. One of the things that's interesting, I think, is, and it's sort of a gender thing, I'm sorry to say that, but I think women tend to be less overconfident because we are so used to having to question ourselves all the time. And that's a broad brushstroke question. I know that is a consensus issue among women that I work with. But when you think you might be becoming overconfident in something, is remember your checklists. Keep going back. You know, did you check what the situation is? What, you know, in sailing land, it might be like what the current weather is, what the predictions are, you know. And so similarly, like when you think you're confident in stuff, like don't rest on it.
For my presentation, I may use the term pilot with ship pilots, captains, or leaders as kind of one and the same. So I want to use that term synonymously because in my business, it's normal for the captain to be the someone you would picture as being the leader. So I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. What I'd like everyone to do for a minute is close your eyes. And I want you to try to picture a sea captain. Get in your mind of what a captain looks like. And we're going to advance to the next slide. And I want you to open your eyes. Is this what you saw? Is this what you pictured in your mind of what a captain should be, what a captain is? The old man, right? Someone who's confident and knowledgeable, like we've talked about. Someone who has experience, wisdom, or all-knowing. And this, what I would argue, is somewhat kind of the beginning of the problem, is when our mental model of what a captain should be versus what a captain might be. Now close your eyes for a minute, and we're going to advance to the next slide. And now open your eyes. Now, if you're on a Russian ship or a Greek ship or an Indian ship where culturally, you know, it's a male-dominated culture, and now you're taking orders from Captain Christy Taylor, this is challenging for many reasons. Number one, on the vessel itself, the crew is composed of people who come from different backgrounds, mixed nationalities, ethnicities, cultures. They speak different native languages. The ship is not necessarily theirs, right? So you have the ship owners, and then you have the ship managers. So there's challenges there. The ship is navigating in a foreign land with different customs and cultures and laws and regulations. So this represents tremendous challenges for the captain and the pilot, and it's extremely difficult to build trust. And trust is necessary for any high-performing team, particularly on board vessels where you have to do your job flawlessly. So I'd like to advance to the next slide. And this is where bridge resource management comes into play. First of all, good leaders have to be good communicators. And what I mean by that is the leader, the captain, the pilot, they must speak in a manner that's calm, that's clear, and that's concise. And it starts with transparency, as Walker pointed out, and Captain Blank, Dr. Blank. Transparency means in our business, you first of all start out by doing the master pilot exchange, and that's where you're exchanging information. The captain is communicating with the pilot about the vessel itself, the capabilities, the equipment, all of these things the pilot doesn't know. And then the pilot in exchanges information with the captain about the voyage they're about to embark on, both of which don't have the information they need to do the job safely. But the emphasis here, as Dr. Blank pointed out, is the exchange of information. It has to be open, it has to be honest, and it has to be transparent. A good leader also ensures that all of the risks that they're about to embark on and the voyage entails, all of the risks have been addressed. They've been managed and they've been controlled down to the lowest possible acceptable level. And as Dr. Blank pointed out, and this is where drills come in. A good leader is going to put the crew first, meaning safety is paramount. And drills provide the captain confidence and the crew confidence that when something happens, the crew is going to respond adequately and it's going to be fluidly. Lastly, it's about humility. A good leader is humble. And I'm reminded by a quote from Ray Kroc, none of us is as good as all of us, You don't always have accurate information. You don't always have, the best tactical picture. And so proper leadership is one where you create a culture where even the most junior person feels empowered to speak up and say something without consequence.
I too am a sailor. I sailed a 72,000-ton ship around the world. I drove it with my fellow crew for over 2 full years of my life, actually up to around 900 days at sea. I spent 15 years as a strike fighter pilot in the Navy, in peacetime and training, and in combat for several years over in the Iraqi theater. I'm a recovering crappy leader. And it's fundamental to understand that you're not a great leader, but I am getting better every day, and through help of others, it's really helped me. So why am I talking to you guys about sailing? Well, number one, I did land on a boat, so I have credibility, and I drove that boat next to another boat 62 feet apart, doing 20 knots in heavy seas, doing conning alongside. So I have driven a boat as well. In aviation, although I flew a single seat airplane in the military, we work as a team. We always fly as a 4-ship. And at times I've led a 70 airplane strike into Iraq, and we had to work together somehow. We work with our environment. Man, sailing scares me because the ocean scares me, and I like to stay on the boat or in the air. But we work with the environment, we work with weather, we work with unknowns. Things change all the time, and we have to be able to deal with that. Trust is fundamental when you're working with a team. Somehow you have to create an environment of trust so that when I'm looking at my wingman, I tell them, shut down your right engine, you're on fire. They're looking at their instruments and they don't see what I see, and they're willing to shut down their engine in mid-flight when we're still 400 miles from the carrier out over the middle of the ocean. When you look at the bad leaders that you've dealt with, because I've learned more from bad leaders than I have from good leaders. When you look at the bad leaders, you're going to find out that all of them basically had extremely low EQ behaviors. And if you go back and look at the great leaders, the ones you want to emulate and learn from, you will see, if we look at the EQ books, all of them were extremely high EQ from self-awareness, self-regulation, control. Those are the things that, besides becoming an expert in your field and understanding what it is you're supposed to do, the how you do it with the emotional intelligence side will make you a leader that people will follow always. The key for me being successful in what I've done so far in life, it's knowing that I am not the smartest person in the room, but my team makes up for that. And having a team that can be transparent and trust, it's everything. I think there is a time, though, that as long as there's not danger and there's not a emergent situation, if someone's overconfident, sometimes it's great to allow life to teach them a lesson and allow them to fail. Failure is the greatest instructor of all. And I've touched several stoves, and after the third time, I realized I should not do that. You plan succession. I'm sure that there's a captain and a first mate. If I am the division lead or the strike lead, there's always somebody designated. If I get shot down or blown up, they're going to keep going doing their mission. They'll find out where I am. The number 2 takes over and they move on out, and it's seamless. If you are not planning for yourself or other people with individual responsibilities to be gone, then you're not doing your job as a leader. So succession is critical for every critical function on the team.
Well, I wanted to try to home in here on just a couple of things, and in my few minutes. And I'm obviously not a sailor, but I deal with a lot of people in stressful situations. And there's a lot of things we can teach. We can teach technical skills. We can test. technical skills, but it's the personal skills that are really tough. And, whether you're on a boat or on an expedition, you're a long ways from home, and you're in an unforgiving environment, and you're going to have to deal with it. We let people know right from the beginning that we're watching each other because it's in all of our interests. This isn't about trying to play gotcha. This is about helping each of us be better. And the whole idea here is to normalize that so people don't feel micromanaged. I think it's so important that each of us understand the limitations of our teams. And again, everybody has their pluses and minuses. We're trying to get the most out of everyone, as Robin Knox-Johnston said a few minutes ago. And in order to do that, you need to know what people bring to the table, and that might be what they have in their kit bag or their backpack. But I think even more importantly, it's what's between their ears. And Todd, a minute ago, you said, talked about building relationships with people. And I make a point as a guide of trying to understand what's going on with my clients and my fellow guides. One of the things we pound on our guides over and over and over is don't be afraid to change your mind. People tend to be locked into things, and they don't understand that, you can change your mind. You can turn around and go home. You can do whatever. It's rare that you're locked into a situation. And I just think that that's something that people need to hear, that they can change their mind. They're not going to lose face. They're not going to, everything around you is changing. The mountains, the ocean, whatever. We're in the natural world. Our crew is changing, our team, whatever, the weather, we got to be able to change our mind.
For me, it all starts with knowing your people. This can be a difficult thing when you have a crew of 150 or so, and a third of them change out every year. And so how do you figure out what is their level of training? They all have different levels of experience. Just because they were on 3 submarines doesn't mean they did it right. So how do you figure out with this varying folks, what do they know? What's their experience? What are their strong and weak points? What makes them tick? How well are they going to work with the rest of the team? And you got to figure out how you're going to figure that out. I think a good leader develops other leaders, and so you have to always approaching what you're doing with the thought that the next generation is going to be better than this generation. And how do I do that? How do I empower my people in the time that I have to ensure that they're going to do it right? How do you approach the problem? I like the idea of kind of the soft skills versus the yelling skills. There are times and places for both of those things. I think everybody has found that. But are you a mentor or you're a driver? That's back to kind of knowing yourself and knowing your people, right? And see, from my point of view, I felt like I was self-aware enough so that I didn't get overconfident, but sometimes that's in the eye of the beholder. I think that what you got to recognize for your crew and your team is the danger of the overconfident sailor. And that is, who's the most dangerous, for me, who was the most dangerous guy in my crew? Well, that was the reactor operator who thought he knew more than he really did, right? And so now I got this guy who, he's running the reactor and he doesn't know. And so that's there's some hard and soft skills there. One is, how do you assess that? And then 2 is, what do you do about it? I just on the confidence thing again, and I agree completely with Todd and Walker about letting people fail. That's a great lesson teacher. Where I found that my weaker COs when I was Commodore, what would happen is that they didn't have the confidence in themselves to be able to recognize when it was okay to fail or allow somebody to fail. Then they actually would not allow those folks to fail or teach those lessons. And so then it would be a matter of, let's figure out what doesn't give you that confidence that you should have as a leader. You're trying to teach these other folks to be leaders. the good leader is the one who's going to develop his replacement. Your problem is that the Costa there. That's the bad leader who's not going to develop his replacement, right? So you're not going to get any of the backup that you expect to have, and so that ends up being this death spiral. So hopefully the leadership above those captains, like Sir Robin said, is able to make the tough call and recognize that going on and get rid of them. And then I think the last thing is, and Sir Robin mentioned this in his discussion as well. As a leader, you got to be willing to make the tough decisions.
Of course, one of the great leaders to benchmark is Ernest Shackleton and his escapades in Antarctica in 1914. But he once attributed his own leadership skills to growing up in a family with only a mother and sisters. And that's where he picked up empathy and could feel some of the issues among his crew. And of course, he couldn't be in a worse circumstance than they were, stuck in Antarctica with no communication and World War I raging in Europe. He also had the skill of adjusting goals. When the situation changed, he acknowledged the change and he adjusted his goals. One was to get to South Pole, but then it was to get to the edge of South America. Then it was to get the boat to South George Island, and then get back and get his men.
Well, thank you very much for that interview with Sir Robin Knox-Johnston. Some fascinating thoughts on leadership. And Robin, you've sure done a lot of things in your life, and we're the recipients of all that knowledge and experience. Thank you very much. I also enjoyed the previous panel's discussion. A lot to take away from them and a lot to study. We have a great panel coming up on leadership under sail. Some great panelists have a lot of experience in the America's Cup, racing around the world championships, very ambitious cruising, and we look forward to hearing from them. Before we get to our panel, I'd like to share a few thoughts on leadership that I've experienced over the years. In my view, leadership is the essence of life. You want to cherish those moments when you're in charge. When you're the leader, however, be the leader. You're the one with the responsibility. You can delegate authority, but never responsibility. You do need to be accountable when you're in charge. And sometimes when you're a leader making those big decisions, it's lonely. Sure, you want to get all the input you can from your teammates and people that are around you. But at the end of the day, you are the one that are making the decisions. So you want to make good decisions. The first thing to do is to set up what your goal is. What is the mission? Gather your team together, have a crew meeting, just like you would have on any sailboat, and discuss what the mission is. Assign jobs to everybody so they clearly understand their role and their responsibilities. You can adjust things along the way, and there's some unforeseen things that'll come along. And maybe at that point, you have another crew meeting to get everybody and reset the mission or direction of what's going on. And then, of course, when it's all over, bring everybody back again, get the input, hear what went well, hear what didn't go well, make a list, and you'll be stronger the next time you're out there on the water. So it's very important that everybody knows what the game plan is. And for you as the leader, sometimes you go with your gut instinct. All the time you rely on your experience, and you are the one in the heat of battle that must remain calm. If you're calm, it's amazing. Everybody else around you will follow suit and they'll be calm too. So you don't want to find yourself yelling more and more about less and less, is something I've seen on a lot of sailboats over the years. Also keep in mind, when you're the leader, you got to act like it. You've got to look good, be consistent, say fewer words than too many words, be loyal with those that are working with you, and they'll be loyal in return. So these are some of the things that I've learned over the years to help me out with leadership. And most importantly, embrace it, have fun with it, learn from it. And the only thing that'll happen is you'll be better the next time you are in charge. So with that, let's go on to our panelists who, as I said, have crossed oceans, sailed the America's Cup and around the world races, and have done an awful lot of thinking and writing and lecturing about the sport of sailing. And we're going to start up with Kenny Reed.
So starting off, first of all, it's an honor to be here. And I find leaders always are trying to be better leaders. I'm going to use personal experience. Everybody here is going to tell their own stories, is going to tell their own anecdotal stories as to what helps define leadership. I'm just going to use my own personal experience because that's what I have. That's what is concrete for me. It's not only the good, but I think in many cases, it's the bad that actually helps determine your leadership ability and especially as you move forward. It can't be memorized. This has to be organic. This has to come naturally. And that takes a step all the way back to the beginning of my sailing career. And a lot of us on this call started out college racing, and I had a very, very successful junior year, and we won national championships and college sailor of the year, and decided that it was probably my duty to become the captain of the team. And I ran for captain of Boston University my senior year. And I was honestly the worst captain in the history of captains because I thought being a leader and being a captain was to be everybody's friend. I had no idea that it was about helping get the coach's message passed on, helping get the sailor's message passed back to the coach, dealing with logistics, dealing with the school, dealing with organization. I honestly just thought it was about being everybody's buddy. And I was a total failure. And by the way, our team didn't have success that final year. And I really attribute it a lot to what I did and my shortfalls. So then you move on to something like a J24. And in my life, everything relates back to J24s, but it's a 5-person crew, which at the time was a pretty big deal. And this is where leadership for me started to come together because it became about part of the team. Like my job, my role was to put together a team that could be successful. And probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years into it, several world championships, I read an article about ourselves after a world championship. And the article was about the fact that Reed's team won the regatta before they even put their boat in the water because everybody on the team had a role. It wasn't an all-star team, but there was somebody in charge of getting the boat measured in, somebody in charge of the sails, somebody in charge of the foils and the boat and getting all the parts and pieces together. Somebody was in charge of the rig. We developed a team and that's what I think this is leading to my main point. The leader put a team together who could succeed and not a team together that was an all-star team. You have to have enough understanding of the situation to surround yourself with great, smart people. That is not a threat. And I've seen plenty of people not do that approach because they believe it's a threat to their leadership ability. Great leaders surround themselves with great people. And that is an absolute fact. And the final thing I want to say is you can never be afraid to put your hand up yourself and say, this is my fault. There are also too many people who are great sailors, who are great business people. It's me, and it's always somebody else's fault. That can't happen. Great leaders can't ever let that happen. We had a case in the second Volvo in China. The boat was we weren't living up to success, to the pre-race success. And we had a big team meeting and the team was expecting a whipping, like what the hell's going on here? We gotta, and I just walked into the room and said, guys, this is on me. And I explained for a half an hour how at this stage this was on me and how I thought we could, and I think I won them back. And by always putting your hand up and saying, this is my bad, I don't mind doing the dirty work, I'm gonna be the first in the bilge, I'm gonna be the first helping and any bit of dirty details that it takes, I think the team again comes together. So bottom line, leaders create great teams, and without great teams, no individual is ever gonna have success on their own, especially in this sport.
And I think in part, and I don't like to dwell on the fact that female and breaking ceilings and that kind of stuff. But I think in part because I was a female, one of the very first things that I always did was preparation. And that has gone through in every single program. Back in, before Maiden, I was a sailor in Lake St. Clair, and we used to spend the cold winters diagramming out the crew positions on the Choate 40 we were sailing. And that was our social stuff for the every Tuesday night throughout the winter. And I think that is one of the keys to leadership, is if you're prepared as the leader, if you've thought through every single scenario, disastrous and positive, then you end up being part of the solution. You have a strong base there. One of the things is that I've learned through the years is engaging every single person in the decision making is super critical. From the team meetings, I know that many of you have heard the saying that the America's Cup is a long series of meetings interrupted by a yacht race. It truly is, and that is part of it. And we do the same thing here at Oakcliff. Every single day we have a team meeting so that everybody is in the position of being able to participate and fully informed. And probably 80% of the time, the best ideas come from the least likely source. Being in charge is that you're the chief worrier, and you're always having to think about what can go wrong and how are we going to fix it. Your job is to be ahead of the time, ahead of the game. Even if you're just doing the pit, you want to know what might break and already have mapped out in your mind what you're going, where you're going to tuck and roll to be able to release the bobstay or whatever it is that is the fuse to make the situation better. And I currently have, I think most people are aware, at Oakcliff, we shut down on March 5th. When I say shut down, we locked in, we created our bubble. So being the chief warrior has come to a whole new level when I have 20 plus 15 to 25-year-olds that we've had to keep safe in the bubble, training, going to high school, going to college, sailing, getting better, working, maintaining the boats. And the biggest one is I got tired of telling them that they couldn't date in various terms. So the Oakcliff language that I guess we could add to the Bible is there's no licking strangers allowed out there. Too much empathy, too much compassion means that you make the right decision, but you make them way too late. And then if you're only worried about what you're looking like and the toughness, then you're going to make bad decisions early. So it is such a balance, and it is a fair amount of give and take and evolution. I like that idea of Shackleton readjusting what is our goal. And we do that, every single morning. What is our goal today? Moving forward. But I do believe that in the bottom line is if you've prepared well, you're involved every single person in your team as much as possible in the decision making. And then you're constantly reevaluating. Being a strong leader is really quite easy and smooth and fun.
I want to start with a quote from a Chinese philosopher who said, "He who leads least leads best." And the corollary to that is that you want the crew to be able to say, quote, "We did this ourselves." And if you can achieve that, I think as a leader, you've done most of the job. When you read about disasters out on small boats out in the ocean, very often they have occurred because the skipper and the crew got overly tired and undernourished. And then the critical dimension that I try to put in every boat I've been involved with. The crew. The two most important aspects of choosing the crew are competence and commitment. You need both in all members of the crew, and the commitment, of course, goes back to the mission. You need brains and you need brawn. And you also need enthusiasm. To me, the best example of enthusiasm is somebody who's up in the bow with a big wave coming, and he or she gets a whole lot of water down the back of the neck, and instead of complaining, they come back in the cockpit laughing. Now, that's gold. If you can have somebody who who behaves that way, you hang on to that person forever. And I just want to end with one concept, and that is that good judgment comes from bad experience. And the other way of saying that is that you have to learn from your failures. And we all have failures, and we all will have failures, but you have to keep learning. And if you do that, you end up being good seamen.
I was quite intrigued that you've been up Everest and done some mountain climbing, and of course a lot of deep water, blue water sailing. Are there some similarities between climbing a mountain and long distance racing?
Oh, I think absolutely. Stamina is one of them, but the most important is an understanding of the weather. And many of the younger mountaineers I met were not paying attention to the weather in a way that those of us out in the ocean have to do every minute of every day. So I tried to bring that skill to my mountain climbing colleagues. And as my initial story of getting Bob Rice in the act, that certainly helped.
One of my observations through my time offshore and my day job at the Naval Academy of Training Midshipmen in leadership, that has also been borne out a little bit by listening to everybody earlier, is that, we train and learn leadership in a 4-step process. It's kind of a repeating loop. It starts with training, whether that is some form of formal training, or probably, like most of us have been in this for a while, when there wasn't a lot of formal training early on, we got on the job training. The next step in that process is to practice that training. And that helps build muscle memory, especially when you're doing things related to safety and seamanship, like crew overboards, damage control, and if damage control isn't successful, maybe an abandoned ship drill. And then you gain experience. And in the course of gaining that experience, we make mistakes. We're all human. We make mistakes. Hopefully we learn from our mistakes. Which brings us to the fourth point, which is reflection, which is a term that I've learned since working at the Naval Academy, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying that we learn from our mistakes. So we do debriefs. I think a couple of the military people on the former panel talked a lot about debriefs, pre-briefs. U.S. sailing and world sailing have done a great job over the past few years of looking at incidents that have happened in our sport and putting together some great reports so that the greater sailing community can learn from things that other people have gone pear-shaped. As I said earlier, I'm lucky to be employed by the Naval Academy, and I'm the director of the Offshore Sail Training Program. It is part of our professional development. It's an option for the midshipmen during the summer. We teach experiential leadership, seamanship, and nav. I'd like to tell the mids that it's not, it's a chance for them to experiment with all the leadership theory that they've learned at the academy. We put them in a dynamic environment too, so you can't learn the leadership in a classroom. I heard somebody say that earlier. So you go out and practice and you get experience. So this is a chance for them to learn a new skill set, which they'll continue to do through their Navy careers and what we continue to do throughout our sailing careers. What I think of as some great qualities for leadership are communications. Dawn talked earlier about her Bible. In the Navy, we have standard operating procedures. So we have a whole chapter on exactly what you say, just like Dawn was talking about. So I think there's a lot of overlap. And I don't think it's accidental that this panel features a lot of people who have prior military experience, because they have had the formal training that we're just starting to get into in sailing, of coming up with your standard commands, coming up with your standard operating procedures. My panel this afternoon is on train the way you fight, fight the way you train. So that kind of goes back to that training and then practicing and then gaining experience, because that's pretty much how we learn.
The job as navigator is very different. It's more of a supporting role in leadership. And I think if I do my job well as navigator, I allow all the other leaders within the team to do their job well, whether that's the skipper, the watch captains, or even the foredeck chiefs. But everybody has the tools to do it right. The elements that I do as navigator, and Ken will be able to comment on some of this, but it starts with, being perfectly prepared myself. And that's something that the crew can tell. If the crew asks a question and you have the notice of race and the SIs memorized, and you know everything there is to know about the sources of weather and current, and you can answer all those questions off the top of your head, that spreads confidence to the crew, and that's critical. I'll do an extensive pre-race sit-down, evening briefing with the crew, describing the typical situations and conditions throughout the race. And try to do this when the crew first shows up at the venue. And then the goal of that is to get the crew's head in the game for the expected conditions of the race, and also get the same terminology used. So then when we're communicating later during the race and communicating later in subsequent briefings, we can use shorthand in terms of, what are the major issues for this race. Then I'll do a previous night briefing before the race with specific weather, at which time the skipper and I and the watch captains will outline, the initial strategy and plan for the race. And then, of course, there'd be the morning of the start briefing, just after dock out when things are peaceful again. And then at that point, just do a 10-minute briefing just as an update to the previous night's briefing. Then during the race, every watch change, and this is an interesting one, but every watch change, I'll brief the skipper and then brief the oncoming watch captain. And briefing the skipper is interesting, and Ken will have some comments on this. But I find that it's necessary to have, at least a sentence or two conversation with the skipper before I brief them, because I find skippers come with 3 different moods into the briefing. There's the curious mood, in which case I'll typically lead with my conclusion, and then I'll go into the background of all the information and why. And then there's the skipper that is in the hurried mood, where they just want to get onto the deck as quickly as they can. And if that's the case, I'll just, cut to the chase and, lead with the conclusion. And then at that point, the skipper's probably off. And then there's the third mood that a skipper can have, which is argumentative. And that's the most tricky. And if that's the case, I never lead with my conclusion, because the skipper is invariably, very smart, logical, clear-thinking person who's going to immediately start to argue against it. And what I found in time is that if I allow my opinion to be changed, it's almost always a mistake, because I went into the decision with an open mind and I'm pretty good at what I do. And if I allow, Kenny or Moose or somebody to talk me out of it, it's often a mistake. So if the skipper's in an argumentative mood, then instead of leading with my opinion, what I'll do is I'll just present the information. And then the skipper will almost always come to the same conclusion I did. But I find it's critical before I do the skipper's briefing at every watch change to have a sentence or two conversation to figure out which approach to use.
Stan, I'm intrigued watching you in the Volvo Ocean race some years ago with Mike Sanderson. We'd watch you on the tracking, and the fleet is on a direct course heading to the finish lines thousands of miles away. And there's your boat going off on some tangent, actually losing distance to the fleet to pick up a new front. And how do you have the courage to make those kind of calls?
Well, the preparation is where I get my courage, but the thing that I find essential for those kinds of decisions is the crew has to see them coming. So the crew has to have been briefed in the pre-race briefing and in the briefing for the previous couple of days that we have a major decision coming where we're going to have to, for example, take this lead we've built up at huge effort, and we're going to have to invest that lead in purchasing a course that will get to the finish the quickest. And after we invest that lead, we're going to be in last place in the standings. And that can come from, tacking first in a transatlantic, or it can come from jibing last on the first leg of the Volvo on the way to Cape Town, or it can come from, taking a more southerly course in the Transpac. But in any of those cases, what you're doing is you're taking my currency, which is miles. We all know the quickest course to the finish is the Great Circle. But in many cases, I'll have to sail a longer course to get to the finish quicker. And when you sail a longer course, you're investing extra miles sailed with an expectation of a return on that investment of more than the extra miles you sailed. And so if I am navigating a race where we're going to have to make a major investment like that, especially if I'm going to have to invest our entire lead, the crew has to know that. They have to see that coming. And it better work.
Stan, you've had, probably a little luck, but you've earned it to sail on many of the world's great yachts with great skippers and great owners over the years. Can you give us an example of two of some great leadership during a time of adversity or some special moment?
Well, I think two of the most rewarding skippers I've had the opportunity to sail with, one is here, Kenny, and the other one is Mike Sanderson, Moose. And both of those guys, I haven't been in the Marines, but both of those guys, lead the way. I understand from my nephew and others who, are officers in the Marine Corps that people lead in the Marines, which is, they lead from the front, they share in the shit, they stand tall, they take care of their guys. And I think it's just a pleasure to navigate for leaders like that. And then they support me, when the decisions are tough.
There was some comment there Renee made about reviewing when we have calamities in sailing and keels fall off or rig breakdowns or problems. But you've been a strong advocate to really research these things and find out exactly what happens so it doesn't happen again, similar to the aircraft industry. How is that accepted? How do people that go through these things accept a review when they've had problems?
It's actually one of the projects that you and I have worked on together, Gary, over the last 4 to 8 years at World Sailing, is to try to evolve the culture of our sport to be more like the culture in aviation, where whenever there's an incident, everybody involved gets involved in the debrief and the analysis of it. And the one confidence I think we all have, even commercial aviation, if there is an incident, eventually we know that a report will come out, the report will be public, even if it destroys some reputations, but the report will come out, it will be public, and there will be an answer to the question of, can changes be made to avoid that accident happening again? And then in our sport, we've done a terrible job of that in the past. And there's still embarrassing situations like, the report analyzing why, Rambler 100's keel fell off still isn't public. And, and I've had the ability to read it, as have you. And there's things that can be learned from reports like that for the sport, but nevertheless, they haven't been made public. But more recently, I think our sport is doing a lot better.
I also want to throw in, during one of our practice sessions, Todd from the first session had a very interesting perspective on leaders having to deal with crises as they unfold. One is the crisis that you've trained for. And when you've got a man overboard, it's something you should have trained for, therefore you have your response. It may need to be modified a bit based on circumstances. Then there's the one that was totally unexpected, you couldn't possibly have trained for. And then there are that middle ground where it's a little bit of one, a little bit of the other, you're not sure, and how one responds. I'm curious of any of your views of what happens when you're out at sea and something totally unexpected occurs. It's not one of the crises you gamed out. How do you deal with it?
Mid-South Atlantic, having your mast fall over, living on the most remote island, most remote inhabited island on the planet for 6 days, having a ship pick you up, putting a boat on a ship, and then trying to make the start of the next leg. That's going to fall under the what the heck are we doing next category. And what was one of the most interesting things, Gary, was the response of the crew the first night we got to Tristan da Cunha. It was this very somber. First of all, we had to raise $1 million to pay for the whole thing. You're on a phone from the middle of the ocean. You're trying to figure out how to flag down a Russian ship to give you enough fuel to get to Tristan da Cunha. It was just every minute was, wow, I didn't see this one coming. So you got to be flexible. You got to be understanding. You got to be creative. You got to have the troops on your team. And the toughest night was that first night we got to Tristan da Cunha, was putting all the guys in a room and letting it out. And it was tough. It was hard. There was a lot of questions, a lot of things, but we had to do it. You had to do it. You had to let it out. And from that point on, it was a different team. It was structured, but it was interesting how you just had to let it out.
The Volvo that I did for ABN AMRO, which at the end of the day we won, but Moose took an interesting approach, which is pretty common for Volvos, but the responsibility for preparation was distributed. So everybody in the crew, was a leader of an area, and I was the lead for electronics and electrical, and I was the backup for the diesel engine and the backup for medical. But then the first leg, we were pushing too hard. The first leg was very rough. And then we had a series of calamities. One was we had a fascinatingly difficult electrical problem where we had a direct short. A bolt got wedged between the battery positive and the carbon hull. So suddenly we had electrical fires breaking out all over the boat. And when you turned off the battery switch, it didn't help, because the battery positive was directly shorted to the carbon hull. So even though the batteries were shut off, we still had fires breaking out all over the boat, and we were running short of fire extinguishers to put them out. So I'm racking my brain trying to figure out what could cause this. And I eventually figured it out. We've got to have a short between battery positive and carbon. So I go into the battery compartment to unbolt the battery positive, and there's no to unbolt the battery negative in order to disconnect it. And there's no switch on battery negative. And by this time, the boat is full of smoke. It's full of fire extinguisher dust. You can't see more than about 8 inches. And in order to breathe, I'm breathing through one of Moose's socks, which sounds pretty terrible, but at the time it was way better than the alternative. So I get the thing unbolted, and now we have, the boat's pitch black, but at least the fires are not continuing to reignite. Then not long after that, Tony Mutter gets washed aft along the leeward rail, all the way back along his jack line. He hits the leeward steering pedestal and knocks it completely over, tearing open about a 2-foot diameter hole in the deck. So now we're storming along through the Atlantic, and we've got a boat that's pitch black with no electricity, and we've got a 2-foot hole in the deck and water coming in. And then, Moose's reaction, we all expected, Moose to drop out of the race. And Moose's reaction is, okay, I'll drive, the rest of you get on with it, fix it. So, Dave Endian and the guys, it took them a day or so to get the pedestal glass back in. It took me about 2 days to rewire the boat. So everything we needed was running, the instruments, the communication, and all the rest. And at the end of the day, we won the leg. But Moose's reaction was just priceless. Okay, boys, get into it.
Thank you to the 2 panel moderators, John Direct and Gary Jobson, and all the outstanding panelists. Also to the one and only Sir Robin Knox-Johnston for helping kick off this symposium and then joining the panels. Robin's own offshore experiences bear directly on our topic, and his selection and training of skippers and crew for the Clipper races is a unique challenge in our sport. So Robin asked 2 key questions. If you are the leader, do your men trust you? And if you are not the leader, do you trust the leader? Our Leadership Beyond Sailing panel explored leadership in diverse professions, while our Leadership Under Sail panel brought it all aboard. Common themes of leadership were evident, regardless of whether one is in the military, merchant marine, public health, mountaineering, or offshore sailing. Fundamental to leadership are the assumption of responsibility and being accountable. A leader is responsible for planning and preparation, selection and training of the team, placing team before ego, promoting open communication, maintaining situational awareness, remaining calm in an emergency, and instilling optimism that the team can succeed even if the goals must be adjusted in the face of changing circumstances. As mentioned earlier, a great example of such a leader was Sir Ernest Shackleton. Perhaps the best measurement of his success were the optimistic diary entries of the men trapped with him on the Antarctic continent. Here is an entry by Captain Frank Worsley, master of the Endurance. No matter what turns up, he is always ready to alter his plans and make new ones, and in the meantime, laugh, joke, and keep everyone's spirits up. He inspires optimism in everyone. On behalf of Storm Trysail and our partners and sponsors, I thank you for joining us today. We look forward to working together to improve the leadership awareness and skills of our offshore sailing community.